I believe that Hamas, with Iran, basically put out information that led Israel to believe that nothing like this would happen. There was no indication of it, giving Israel the sense that everything is okay. Obviously, it's not okay, but I mean, there's no indication that anything bad was going to happen. The Iranians wanted no part of the Abraham Accords, and some people think that might have been the final. It looked like there would be some type of normalization in relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia. That was the final straw for the Iranians, and they wanted no part of it. So absolutely, they do not want that. They want to maintain dominance in the region. They have indicated their desire to destroy Israel and just wipe them off the face of the earth. So I don't know how much more direct they can be about what their intentions are.
What is going on, guys? There's obviously very little positive to say about what's going on right now with Israel and Hamas, so I'm just going to jump right into the episode. If you guys do enjoy, remember to subscribe, hit that like button, and if you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, leave the podcast a 5-star review and follow so you don't miss any future episodes. And with that, let's get in the show. Steven, welcome back on the show. I wish it was under better circumstances, but obviously we're talking about a pretty difficult topic today, kind of what's going on in Israel and the Gaza Strip. There's not much lightheartedness to say around this, but I guess, what are your initial thoughts and what's kind of happening?
Well, you know, like everyone across the country and around the world for that matter, I've been glued to the television set just watching these horrific attacks unfold against Israel. And it's just been, it's been difficult and heartbreaking to watch that. And, you know, I know that Israel and our own intelligence agencies at some point are going to sort of unpack all of this stuff to determine how they missed this attack. But right now, you know, Israel is fighting for its existence right now. And, you know, the sad thing about it is there's just going to be so much more bloodshed before it ends. And that's the tragic part of it. You know? So, yeah, there's a lot, you know, there's a lot going on in the Middle East. There's a lot of issues to discuss. And you know, the path forward is just unknown right now. And, you know, the one thing that's, you know, very concerning to me is the potential for this to blow up even more and just get more involved when you're talking about Lebanon and Syria and, you know, what's Iran's role in this and how this is all going to be played out. Now, right now, the Israelis are going in there to clean out the Gaza Strip and get rid of Hamas. And that's expected, and that's happening now. And one of the latest reports that I read that was a little bit disheartening is that, you know, many of the Palestinians that are in the Gaza Strip are not leaving. And Hamas has basically said they're not going to leave and we're not going to leave. So that just leads to a whole, you know, the possibility of a lot of bloodshed happening before this thing is over.
Can you maybe explain the complexities that is the Gaza Strip? Because Palestine is a cause. Like, people, if they just look at the region and they know that there's Palestine, there's Israel, and, you know, there's confrontation there. But there's obviously the West Bank, there's the Gaza Strip, there's the borders with Egypt, you know, with the Gaza Strip. All that kind of complexity is there. So can you maybe differentiate kind of what's happening in the region and why focus is currently on one area that made people consider Palestine versus kind of the both?
Yeah, sure. You know, if we had you know, days to talk about the Arab-Jewish conflict, we could do that. And this goes back for decades. You know, it goes back, you know, way before even Israel was created, which was after World War II, and in 1948 became a country. But there's been disagreement about, you know, who historically has, you know, connections to that particular part of the world. And, you know, after World War II, we created the State of Israel. And a lot of Palestinians felt that they were displaced because of that. And, you know, so this has been going on for decades, the Arab-Jewish conflict. And so right now we have a situation where, you know, Palestinians have been sort of restricted to the Gaza Strip and then to the West Bank. And so, you know, for decades, you know, that conflict has been going on, and there's been numerous attempts through, you know, many presidential administrations to try to bring peace and understanding that region, understanding what the Palestinians are concerned about, which is, hey, you know, we have a historical connection to this land and we've been displaced. And now we're you know, restricted to these small areas That's a big issue for them. So that's been going on for quite some time. So as part of that, as part of that struggle, terrorist organizations like Hamas have sprung up. And basically, Hamas, was created around 1987, and it's kind of an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood that came from Egypt. And they now control the Gaza Strip in terms of administratively running that. But it's going in and out. That's controlled. The security part of it's controlled by the Israelis. And it's just been a contentious issue. So obviously, it has just exploded with this latest attack that's really unprecedented in terms of the magnitude of it. I mean, over 20 different locations were hit, simultaneously, and this took a lot of coordination. And it is sort of surprising, and we've talked about this before, how Mossad, which is a very impressive intelligence apparatus, and the CIA missed this because there was a lot of parts to this. I mean, just didn't happen overnight. It was coordinated, and some of the reports are now saying that this goes back as far as August in terms of the planning of this. So all of that is going to come out, and they're going to look at the red flags that they missed and try to figure out what to do next about that. But right now, it's just a potential for involving more countries in the region, and it's just right now it's just not looking good.
Definitely want to get into some of the geopolitical ramifications, but I think first kind of focusing on the intel breakdown, because that's kind of been such a key piece of this. A lot of comparisons are being made to 9/11 in terms of this is Israel's 9/11. And in many ways, I think it's a pretty fair comparison because the geopolitical ramifications are going to be and could be very similar. The social ramifications, both in the U.S. and obviously over in Israel, there's a lot that's happening here. But one of the other areas what you're highlighting here is the possibility for kind of a miss on the intel with this. Rumors are coming that Egypt may have warned the IDF about this, which, again, we're pretty early in this right now, so who knows what actually holds water. But I'm curious to get your thoughts on that. Do you think it might be a similar type of deal that we saw with 9/11, how there was some intelligence there, but, a lack of communication and also being able to reflect on what's real and what isn't?
Oh, absolutely. As I mentioned before, Israel is going to take the time to do an in-depth analysis. And I think that's going on now with our own intel agencies, with the CIA and the DIA, looking for what they may have missed over the last few months. So, yeah, that's a big issue. But I have my own thoughts on that. And, there's a difference between intelligence and information. And a lot of people just don't understand that. We acquire lots of information. But what kind of story does that tell? It's not always intelligence. It's just information. And right now, I think we rely too heavily on technology to acquire vast amount of information. But when you get so much coming in, it becomes difficult to connect the dots, to have it actually be something that you can use, intelligence information that tells a story. And we refer to the term actionable intelligence, which means information that you can actually use to make a decision. Like, for example, you mentioned 9/11. Well, there were models. We had discussed the possibility of terrorists using aircraft against us, but it wasn't specific intelligence. It was just, a probability. So what do you do with probabilities? Do you spend billions of dollars on probabilities? So it becomes tough to make those types of decisions. Where do you put your dollars? Where do you put your security? Where do you put your focus when you have this information that involves probabilities? So I think in the Mideast, which is a very hotbed of intelligence and information coming in, I think in this particular case, and it may be proven that I'm wrong on this, but I think that there was a lax because they collected so much information, but it's, again, as I mentioned, it's just so hard to connect all the dots. I think there was a false flag program run by Hamas, letting Israel believe that everything is okay. I know there were a lot of work permits that were granted, so a lot of Palestinians were allowed to go into Israel proper to work. So I think there was definitely a program to lure the Israelis into thinking that everything was not quite okay, but everything was not that bad. Let me put it in that way. So here we now have a situation where we think the Iranians were also involved in this. And the Iranians, what they would have brought to the table is the fact that they would have focused on the encryption part of the traffic. In other words, keeping things under wraps that maybe Hamas wouldn't have been so sophisticated in understanding how to do in terms of encrypted messages. And also, I think the Iranians have a good understanding of the capabilities of Israel in terms of intelligence gathering, and may have used that information to help keep this thing under wraps. Because obviously there were no warnings, there was no information given, there was no heads up from anyone, as far as we know right now, that this was going to happen. As was reported on television, there was a party, a fairly large musical festival happening right outside the Gaza Strip. So that tells me that there were no warnings, and they used paraglides, they used overwhelming force to break through the Israeli defenses. So it was well planned, well organized, and kept under wraps. They're going to have to look at what they may have missed, and maybe look at their intelligence apparatus and make some changes going forward.
The videos of that are absurd too. There's people literally at this dance party, this festival, and they're literally seeing the paragliders like glide in. I mean, it's something out of a movie or something. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, that was unprecedented, and I mean, they've obviously had tensions in the past, and there have been conflicts, military conflicts, but nothing like this, where a well-coordinated, attack that involved over 20 locations, occurred simultaneously, and it's been quite devastating for Israel. So yeah, they're going to have to go back and look at all of these things and determine what they missed. But I think, and it's been my experiences, and I base it on some of my own experiences in the Secret Service when I was the recipient of a lot of intelligence information. So typically, when I was doing a foreign advance in a country, I would get intelligence reports about the geopolitical situation in that country, what terrorist activities may have happened. The information may talk even getting down into criminal activity and so forth that we would need to be concerned about before the president would come in. The problem with that is that it contained lots of information. So, but very seldom did it have any specificity to it. So, I would look at these reports and read them, and at the end of it, I would go, okay, I now know a lot more information, but what do I do with it? How do I make decisions based upon all this information that lacks specificity? So when I'm on the ground, what I'm worried about is, when is it going to hit me? What does it look like? Is it bigger than a school bus? Those types of things where you can actually make decisions on. And that's the difficulty of intelligence, is because it's very difficult sometimes to connect all the dots and get really specific. And I think also our reliance too much on technology and not enough on human, which is human intelligence, meaning having sources on the ground, people that can actually tell you what's happening, has been problematic.
Can you explain that a little bit more? So like the CIA, Mossad, are they getting too involved in terms of like trying to check social media sites or, people's algorithms of what they're looking up versus actually having people on the ground for intel gathering?
Oh, absolutely. And that's what I'm talking about when I refer to technology. It's, using signal intelligence, looking at computer activities and looking at all technical information to kind of help you tell a story. So I'm not saying that doesn't need to be done. Obviously it does. But the problem comes in is that, as I mentioned before, sometimes you're dealing with so much information that it's hard to determine, is there really any good intelligence in all of this information? You're monitoring social media sites, you're monitoring traffic, you're monitoring phone calls, you monitor whatever. But is there good intelligence information? That's the difficulty in going through all of this. And technology now allows us to collect tons of information coming in. I mean, a voluminous amount of information. And being able to go into that and pick out what's important and what's not is the challenge. And when you rely too much on that, it becomes a problem because, when you're focusing on that, that usually leaves a gap someplace else. And I believe that the the gap is getting back to the basics of human intelligence source, having people on the ground that can get you the information. Now, that's not easy. I'm not going to say it's easy. Getting people in place that can give you that information and having those people vetted that they are giving you truthful information is a challenge in and of itself. But I think it's important that we go back to basics and focus on getting that human intelligence, in addition to continuing with the collecting this vast amount of technical information as well.
How hard is it to get human intel in some of these situations with some of these terrorist groups? Because I feel like, at least from my perspective, obviously not having an intel background, but it seems like infiltrating these groups would be a lot more difficult than infiltrating, the Russian government, even though that would definitely be a challenge as well. But, Russia, Iranian government, even these terrorist groups, I mean, they're so close-knit and extreme very clearly that I feel like that would be pretty difficult. So what's the difference in getting the human intel there? Like, what are some of the steps? Like, what are the challenges there?
Well, it is extremely difficult because obviously these organizations are close-knit. And so trying to get someone in there is difficult, but it's been done. I mean, the CIA has got resources. It's not an impossible task, and it's been done. And I think we just need to continue to, not let that skill set just dissipate and rely on technology to tell us the story. But you're right; it is a challenge to get people in, get close information. But we've had sources, and we continue to have sources that provide us information. So, that's a good thing. But I just think we need to continue to focus. But it is a challenge without a doubt.
So, looking into intel combing, I think this will be really important for people over the next week, over the next month. Hearing this from you, but how do you separate the bullshit from the truth? I mean, going on social media right now, it's everything's fake news or everything's true or it's all propaganda or who knows? Like any of the reports. I mean, we're talking about, and I don't even want to get into this situation, but the 40 babies. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you can Google the news story. It's one of the worst things that I've heard in any conflict zone, but of course, you have people saying this story, like immediately calling it untrue, not real. This story's planted, changing people's words. Like one reporter came out and said, well, the military hasn't fully confirmed it, which again, they're obviously not going to until they do their investigation. But people immediately take that as, oh, this is clearly fake. I mean, how do you separate the bullshit and the propaganda here versus being able to kind of look at the truth with so much flooding on social media and stuff?
Yeah, that's a challenge because again, we talked about that previously, where so many people have access to the internet now. So many people can chime in and provide their opinions, and we're sitting here listening to all of it, trying to separate the wheat from the chaff. It's very difficult. But one of the things that I've learned in my experience is that you have to be mindful of first reporting because it is often not complete and is often inaccurate. And that's the damage because sometimes when stuff comes right out and that's the first thing that you hear, that's in your mind and you run with that. And that's a challenge because, people always want to get the information out very quickly. There's always that competition in news organizations to come forward with the story first. But when you do that, you run the risk of getting it wrong. And there's been, numerous occasions of, supposedly credible news organizations getting it wrong because of their rush to get the information out. So that's one of the things that I can just tell people, be mindful of first reporting. It's often incorrect or at least incomplete. But yeah, it's a challenge, and that goes with. So it's a challenge for us as listeners of all this information, recipients of it, and that bleeds over into our governments as well in terms of trying to understand all this information that's coming in and what makes sense and what doesn't, because again, as I mentioned before, there's information and then there's intelligence, and they're different. And you've got to focus on those things that are credible. And, these are the things that are presented, to our decision makers, to make the calls on what to do. And unfortunately, it's not an exact science by any stretch. And what it comes down to is probabilities. What's the probable likelihood that, Iran is behind this? What's the likelihood of this? What's the likelihood of that? Very seldom will you ever get 100%, guaranteed confirmation on anything. And, and that goes, for example, with the Chinese, with the COVID, there's evidence now that it came from that laboratory. Will the Chinese ever confirm it? Absolutely not. So, it comes down to probabilities, right? So we use probabilities to make decisions, and you just hope that, it's high enough where you feel comfortable enough before you go ahead and either, respond with sanctions, or you respond with military force or whatever. And I think we're going to be facing that situation with Iran, because they've come out and said, no, we didn't have anything to do with this. We support it, and we applaud what the fighters did, but it wasn't us. There you go. So here we are. Now, will we ever get 100% confirmation that the Iranians were involved? Are they going to, raise their hand and say, yes, we did it? No. So now we have probabilities. And what do you do? Because big decisions have to be made. And I fear that that's what's going to go on right now with the Iranians' involvement in this massacre.
I'm going to adjust your mic real quick, just for like right there, just so it's like pointed out. So definitely want to, like I said, get in Iran, but this has just been something that's in the back of my head. So you were talking about Hamas and the false flag program. I want to just differentiate that really quick, but of course, a conspiracy immediately going on the internet, which seems like there's any type of military issue, is that this was a false flag event. So can you maybe explain that, just so people don't immediately mix up the two or think that you're claiming false flag by Israel there, and then, maybe also speak to the fact that this is also something that's kind of ramping up, as well as people think that, Netanyahu, their government, like purposely put
sure.
this there.
Yeah, when you hear the term false flag, and I guess I should have clarified that, because usually false flag means that you make up information in order to justify an action. Like, for example, in World War II, Hitler basically indicated that the Polish had attacked German installations, and that was their impetus to invade Poland. Well, that didn't happen. That was a false flag. But in this instance, I believe that Hamas, with Iran, basically put out indicators, maybe that's a better word, or information that led Israel to believe that nothing like this would happen. There was no indication of it. For example, like the increase in permits for the Palestinians to work in Israel had increased. So that seems to be, okay, then things are going well, or as well as they could go given the situation. There were no indications that anything like this would happen. And I guess giving Israel the sense that everything is okay. And when I say okay, obviously it's not okay, but I mean, there's no indication that anything bad was going to happen. I think there was a program, and I don't have all the details, but I know that in the days to come, there probably will be more information coming out as to what Hamas may have done to, I guess you can say, let Israel think and have them sort of getting into a relaxed state, that something like this wasn't going to happen. So that's what I mean by false flag. It's not a true interpretation of it, but it's what I sort of think may have happened here in this case, among a bunch of other things as well.
No, yeah, I was with you on the definition there. I just don't want people to, maybe they heard that and they're like, well, this is confirmation that it's a false flag by Israel.
No.
I mean, what do you think the rundown is with people immediately jumping on that too? I have a friend who's Jewish, and obviously this was, a very heartfelt time for him. And, we were discussing some of the crazier stuff that we're seeing happening online. And, there's people that are saying it was a false flag operation to bring in the one world government. I mean, what do you think when you hear that, when you hear people trying to twist this into something weird? Like, are you looking at it as this is clearly propaganda from, places like Russia or China? Or do you think there's, a part of the populace that just doesn't want to face kind of the reality of what this situation is? Like, what do you think is happening there?
Yeah, it is puzzling. I have to say, because you look across the world, even the United States included in that. I mean, there are many pro-Palestinian rallies that are taking place, and it's mind-boggling to me, because I understand the Palestinian struggle, which has been going on for decades. I mean, I am not saying the Palestinians have no cause here or have no complaints. It's a very complex situation. So I will give them that. But what happened to Israel is a whole nother level of evil in terms of killing women, killing children, beheading babies. I mean, that is something that is completely different. And I just can't see the justification for backing that type of conduct and evilness, I guess you could say, because it's just been so barbaric. So yeah, I'm a bit surprised by that. Now, will there always be people? Will always be a few that are popping up that would jump on something like this and use it as an opportunity to bring attention to their cause? Sure. But I'm a bit surprised at the amount of protests around the world in favor of the Palestinians. And again, I am not saying that the Palestinians don't have issues. I understand that they've felt like they've been subjugated, for a number of years, and they want this to end. But I can't see this being the way that happens. I mean, as far as I can see it, there's no turning back from this one. I think what just happened, what's going on now in the Middle East, is going to change the landscape forever. And I say that because I don't know how you could ever sit down and say with Hamas, who is basically the governing body of the Gaza Strip, okay, let's talk and see if we can work this out after this has happened. I can't see where you could ever work with the Iranians if it turns out that they were involved in the planning of this, which there's indicators that they were, because this has been so barbaric and so just absolutely horrific that I don't know how you could ever sit down and come back from this. So yeah, it's a big concern. And also, as I mentioned before, the potential for this to expand is huge. So yeah, big issue.
So speaking of the brutality, I know, I mentioned earlier that this is compared by many in Israel as Israel's 9/11 comparing to the United States. You're one of the few people that have actually had physical experience being at ground zero immediately in the aftermath, seeing how deadly that event truly was. And speaking with some on this comparison, I said, one thing very few Americans will even be able to understand comparing those 2 days too, is that they're seeing footage of these deaths in 4K. Like, we're in this modern era, these people, and Israel's a small country, people are friends, like there's some connection for the most part. I grew up in the tri-state area, so I felt that with 9/11, where it's like everybody knew somebody. But you having that type of experience and seeing kind of the brutality, what's your thoughts around that comparison, and kind of, you're probably one of the few people that can almost speak to what the Israeli people would be feeling with something so brutal like this.
Yeah, it's absolutely terrible, and it's almost indescribable. And as you mentioned, today we get firsthand notice of these things. I mean, they're filming these things, and the information just goes around the world very quickly. And it's devastating to watch that and to see that. And yeah, when you have experiences where you've seen or been part of mass devastation like we had at 9/11, where almost 3,000 people were murdered. Yeah, it just it brings it all home again. That here we go again, and the issue today is just so different, and we talked about that earlier before we started the program. War is different. We don't have battlefields anymore. We don't have armies that are out in the desert fighting each other, army to army, uniform to uniform. War has been brought into the cities. War has been brought into people's homes now, and that's the horrible part of it. When I was in Iraq, I went in there with a sort of a corrupted mindset, I guess you could say. We had 9/11. I wasn't happy with anyone from the Mideast. It was just, like many Americans, I was just, I guess, overwhelmed with what had happened and just wanting payback and revenge. But when I got there and I got to know the Iraqis, I realized that many of them had no part of that, wanted no part of it, and are just peaceful people that got caught up. And they were just victims of a terrible regime under Saddam Hussein, and they were not different than me. And my whole mindset changed, and I feel that same way, not only with Iraq but with Afghanistan. And I remember listening to a broadcast of Rob O'Neill, the SEAL who had taken out Osama bin Laden, and he said when he got to Afghanistan, he thought everybody was an enemy. And he looked around and, we're going to be fighting all these people. Then he soon realized that, no, that's not the case. The majority of the people that were in Afghanistan are just peaceful people that just want to exist and find a better way of life for them and their families. Well, I think that same thing carries over to many people in Palestine as well, that they're caught up under a brutal regime. Hamas is the governing authority, and it's a terrorist organization. So, that's the tragic part of it, is that often it's the innocent people that bear the cost and pay the price, often in blood, of one government's fight against another. And I just see that as happening here. And obviously the Israelis have suffered that as well, because again, war is different. It is not fought out in some remote location. It is in our cities, in our homes, where we live, where we work, and that's the tragedy.
Can I ask you to just pull it a little bit closer? Just, and then a little down. Yeah, that's perfect. Sorry. But, yeah, I guess in our first episode, a big theme of the book, which the book will still be linked below, so definitely check it out. But there was, and as you were just highlighting there, in a lot of ways, what you maybe would call a character arc of 9/11, the kind of reciprocal feeling of that, going in and then kind of creating that attachment with the people and understanding there's a separation between Saddam Hussein's government, Al-Qaeda, whatever group it may be, and the people there. I think a lot of people right now are struggling to separate Hamas and Palestinians. So what would you say to that? How would you say to people to be able to separate those two entities after something obviously so brutal?
Well, it's difficult, because emotions are so high, and I understand why. I mean, this has just been a brutal attack. So, it would be hard to make that call right now to talk about that to people, and it's probably not the best time to talk about it. But I think that it does need to be talked about, and I think that there are a lot of Israelis who understand that the Palestinian people as a whole, weren't the cause of this. It was Hamas, a terrorist organization, plain and simple. They drove this, and they're responsible for it. But right now, is it tough to get that, to make that case? Oh, sure. I mean, look at what has happened. It's just very difficult. But it was no different than Iraq and Afghanistan. Again, they were controlled by jihadis that were flooding into Iraq. They were controlled by terrorist organizations, and the people were caught in the middle. And I feel terrible about that, because I know in the days and weeks ahead, many innocent people are going to perish because of this.
So what do you think happens next? What are the next steps for Israelis, for Hamas?
Well, yeah, I think there was obviously a call between President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu, where he urged them to be mindful of the civilian casualties as they go into the Gaza Strip. So Israel is going to go in and clean out the Gaza Strip. And that's their primary issue right now, is to take Hamas out and just decimate them. and take them off the table as a future threat. That's their goal. So that's what they're going to concentrate on now. Now, beyond that, that's, I think, where the question lies. How much are they going to continue to go forward? And I think that's a question that, the United States needs to be involved in, and our partners as well, talking with Israel about what next steps are, because that's where the probability of this expanding is pretty great. We have Hezbollah in Lebanon. We have the Iranians. We have Hamas. And, Israel is surrounded by Arab countries. And it's interesting to hear some of the statements made by, their neighboring countries. They were pro-Palestinian on the issue. So that's the landscape in which Israel has to move forward on this. And it's very, very difficult, very, very complicated. And there's a lot at stake here. So if this thing does expand and the Iranians get directly involved in this, what does that mean for the Israelis? Because they're the ones that are going to have to take the brunt of this. The United States will support them, and we have battle groups over there, and there will be support. But at the end of the day, it's the Israelis' fight. So yeah, a lot to discuss and talk about before next steps. But right now, they're going to concentrate on Hamas and getting rid of them, and then hopefully stop these attacks, that rocket attacks that are coming, and some of them from South Lebanon and from some other areas as well. So that's what they're going to be concentrating on right now.
Tactically, from some, obviously, again, no experience in this type of situation, but tactically, what does an operation to clear out Gaza of Hamas even look like? I mean, it's one of the most condensed places in the world with 2 million people in such a small surface area. So what does that operation even look like?
Well, it's already started. They've cut the power off. They've cut water off. They're making it as difficult as possible with the intent on wanting the innocent Palestinians to leave. So the operation has already started. But as you said, it's a very densely populated area, probably one of the most densely populated areas in the world, with over a couple of million people living in this strip of land. And it'll involve house to house. There's no other way to do it. The Israelis have the capability of bombing it, but you don't want a lot of civilian casualties. You don't want to do that. You don't want to level the entire region. So I believe it's a house to house, and that's not an easy thing to do. And as Netanyahu has said, get to the to the Israeli people, this is going to be long and it's going to be difficult.
How
and
long do you think that'd be?
Oh, it'll be weeks.
And a lot of, definitely. In terms of, I guess it's going to be a lot of losses on both sides as well. I mean, that type of conflict zone is, like you were saying, it's a new type of war, seen very few times, sometimes in, Iraq, Afghanistan, sometimes in Russia and Ukraine, but, it's such a condensed area. So I guess, is that something that they're preparing for as well? It's heavy losses, especially on both sides, but...
I would think so. I mean, obviously the Israelis got a very formidable military force, the IDF, and, this type of possibility has always existed, so I'm sure they have plans to do it. But like every conflict, plans are one thing, but then, things happen after the first shot is fired, and war is very fluid. It changes, the dynamics of battle change, and so who knows what it's going to be like. But I know it's not going to be pretty, that's for sure, and that's the unfortunate thing. So I hope that, we limit the amount of civilian casualties, but I think Israel is determined now, once and for all, to get rid of these terrorist organizations, because I think this is the final straw. They can't continue to live like this and be attacked like this and be concerned, okay, we quell this for now, there's a little bit of peace, and then, 6 months from now, a year from now, it happens again. Because, again, this has been so barbaric. I don't think there's any turning around from this. There's no more talk, the way I see it.
It also seems like the international community, depending on what side of the international community you're on, but if we're talking like Western countries, Europe, the U.S., there's been a massive shift. There was the discussion around the Palestinian cause and, some open support, even now, but with members in Congress and whatever it might be. But I think as we're saying, the brutality, one area where it seems like a lot of the commitment and kind of backing behind Israel's really shifted there. And then there's also the fact that American hostages were taken as well, German hostages, French hostages, hostages from all around the Western world were taken, and likely many will be killed in this. What's the reaction from the international community with that as well? Because oftentimes the global snowball effect that happens when international, people from different countries are killed can really spiral stuff out of control too.
The hostage situation creates a whole different dynamic. And obviously they did that, deliberately to take these people and then to have them as bargaining chips to be able to use them, to, I guess, bargain for certain things. And I know that one of the things that they've already started with is, if Israel continues to bomb, we are going to start killing a hostage, and we'll continue to do that every time a bomb is dropped. So that's where they're trying to bargain and use that. It's a difficult situation because from what I understand, many of these hostages were taken in the tunnels, and that makes it extremely difficult for any type of rescue operation. I know that they're going to be looking at that possibility. They're going to be looking. Everything's on the table in terms of possibilities, and the Israelis, have a very formidable, special operations group that has done this before, and of course, the United States has done this before as well. So we have the ability. This is just a different environment because it is so dense, because it is so complicated, because they have been taken in the tunnels. And, the risk of any type of, incursion, the second they get, any wind of that we're going in, then the possibility of the hostages being executed, just dramatically increases rather than having them successfully removed. So, yeah, that's a whole different dynamic, and it just lends itself to really some tough decision making on the part of America, because we have some of our folks there held as hostage, and on the part of the Israelis who have folks there as well. It's just a complicated, difficult situation.
There's been some discussion around sending U.S. operators there as well that specialize in, hostage negotiation and being able to possibly put boots on the ground directly there to go free some of the hostages in Gaza. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think the U.S. would risk putting boots on the ground for that situation? I know, of course, we always want to look to rescue American lives in situations like this, but again, boots on the ground, a lot is at stake there. Oh,
absolutely. So all of these things are being discussed, and I heard reports to what you just said about, American forces being mobilized in our special operations group and Delta, SEAL Team 6, what have you, to go in there to do this. So they're probably working with the Israelis right now, coming up with contingency plans to do that. But, obviously every plan involves risk, and they're weighing out, the risks versus, the possibility of success in getting these folks out. And then, the possibility of maybe getting some out, but then the rest of them, become, situations in which, the Hamas would execute them. So, you're weighing all of that stuff out in very, very difficult and tough situations because, again, the environment, and then you're dealing with people that are irrational. Sometimes, hostage takers are people that you can work with, people that you can talk with, people that you can bargain with, people that you can, okay, let's sit down and work out how we can resolve this issue. Given what took place with the barbarity, I don't see that as a possibility here where you can sit down and negotiate. So that's out. So that means military action of some kind. So they'll weigh out, the probabilities of success versus, endangering more people that may risk their lives going in to get them versus, will we be successful at this? So this is all going to be weighed out, and all these plans are going to be discussed.
If the U.S. hostages are killed, what do you think our next steps are there?
Well, that's where it becomes difficult. Now, the Israelis, we're supporting the Israelis in terms of replenishing weaponry for the Iron Dome and other munitions that they need. They've not asked us to get directly involved in this conflict in terms of boots on the ground. They've never asked us to do that. And I think the Israelis are absolutely capable of taking care of Hamas in the Gaza Strip and what elements may be existing in the West Bank. So I don't think that's the issue. I think what happens next is the issue. And if American hostages are killed, I think there's going to be a great deal of pressure to get more involved in terms of the United States' play in this. And there will be a lot of questions about the Iranians' involvement. Now, I've listened to Senator Lindsey Graham the other day talking about, bombing Iranians' oil refineries, just putting them out of business. So, there's going to be a lot of discussion. I think if Americans start turning up dead, there's going to be a lot of pressure to do something other than just support the Israelis, with replacement weapons and things like that. And of course, we sent battle groups there. The U.S. Navy's presence is there, and I think that was a warning to other countries to stay out of this. So hopefully they'll heed that message. But again, when our Americans start turning up dead, I think there's going to be a lot more heat to do something further than what we're doing right now.
So what is the indications currently about Iran's involvement? I've heard plenty of rumors, and we've kind of bounced around this, trying to, we're going over what's on the ground happening, but the geopolitical ramifications here are immense. So what does it look like currently in terms of their involvement?
Well, there's clear evidence that the Iranians have been supporting Hamas for quite some time. I don't think that that's going to be disputed by anyone. The issue right now is, what was their direct involvement in this latest incident? So that's going to be looked at, and they're going to be trying to determine that and make a call on that. But that's where it gets tricky, okay? Because again, is there anyone that wants to expand this? Is there anyone that's looking forward to, this conflict right now getting larger, involving Lebanon, involving Syria, the Iranians? Where do all the other Arab countries fall in place? What would be their position in this? We bomb Iran. Where does that lead to? So it's a tough one, and there's a lot of things that need to be discussed. There's a lot of cards on the table, and the State Department, has got his hands full in terms of making recommendations to the president about what the next steps are, because it's very, very complicated.
What are some of the countries? One of the big things that fell through was Saudi Arabia coming. There's been a lot of work there to try to normalize relations between those two, and then Saudi Arabia quickly cut it off with what we've seen from Hamas. Do we think there's also an outside source here trying to assure that there is no stability in the region, whether it be Iran or a very outside player like Russia?
Absolutely. The Iranians wanted no part of the Abraham Accords, and some people think that might have been the final when it looked like there would be some type of normalization in relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia, that was the final straw for the Iranians, and they wanted no part of it. So absolutely, they do not want that. They want to maintain dominance in the region. They have indicated their desire to destroy Israel and just wipe them off the face of the earth. So I don't know how much more direct they can be about what their intentions are. So any normalization of relations between Arabs and Jews, or, in this case Saudi Arabia and Israel, is something that the Iranians would absolutely not want to happen. And I think they've got their thumb on other countries like Qatar. who basically came out with a statement supporting the Palestinians in essence, because Qatar is right across the Gulf, and I don't think that they have confidence that Americans can protect their interests. So I think they're aligning themselves with Iran. In addition to that, one of the effects of our invasion of Iraq was the instability of Iraq and the greater influence of Iranians. Now, it got so bad that there was a point last year where Iraqi Shias were actually fighting Iranian Shias because the Iranians wanted to dominate Iraq politics and have an influence in there, and so there was issues and actually violence that occurred there. So the Iranian influence in Iraq has been growing because they want to become the dominant force in the region, without a doubt.
There's rumors too that some of these weapons may have found their way from Afghanistan, from our pullout. Do you lend credence to that? Does it look like, and how would that have even, that process, like was that Al Qaeda that coordinated that? Would that have been Iran, like to get those weapons from, Afghanistan to Hamas and to be able to operate in Israel like this?
That's what's been reported, that there's a possibility that weapons being used in this particular attack, some of them may have come from Afghanistan, and I don't think that's far-fetched at all. I mean, the Taliban in control of vast amount of the weapons that we left when we left Afghanistan, and the possibility of selling them to Hamas or having them go through an intermediary to wind up getting over there and selling some of these things exists. And I think, again, as this proceeds, I think more and more information is going to come out, and investigations are going to be conducted to determine where these weapons came from and how that happened. So, in my opinion, is that a high possibility? Yes.
And right now, too, we're currently seeing some mortar strikes and even some infantry coming in through some of the other neighboring countries, so like Jordan, Syria, with either direct connections to those countries or Hezbollah. Do you think that these countries or some of these other extremist groups will be entering the conflict, or do you think that they're kind of pacing their time to see where everything goes?
I think they're going to be waiting to see how this all turns out before they cast their lot with one side or the other. Obviously, you have elements that would, terrorist organizations, like you said, Hezbollah and so forth, that are doing some things right now in terms of harassment type of activity and sending over some rockets and so forth and mortars. But full involvement, I think they'll wait to see what happens next. And again, it's very complicated, and we'll have to wait and see how all this plays out because, as you know, the best laid plans often go awry when the fighting starts, and that's a whole different element. So I think they're going to wait to see how this all plays out.
Yeah, Mike Tyson, everyone's got a plan until you get punched in the face.
That's for sure. That's for sure.
What do you think Egypt's thinking right now? I mean, this is one of the things that's very seldom discussed about what's happening in Gaza is there is another border there with Egypt, and there's some Israeli strikes coming in. They've said that they're not going to let any supplies come through that region. They've also dropped bombs in that region because they're saying that there is Hamas tunnels within that area. And the Egyptian president doesn't really want to let refugees come in and have a refugee crisis there because he's worried about extremism in his own country, and he also says that he has to take care of his people first. What's going to be their reaction with this? Because, like we were saying, it's pretty clear that the next step here is a full-on ground operation in Gaza, and there's going to be a lot of violence and a lot of catastrophic stuff happening. I mean, so how are they handling this, and what do you think over the next 6 months that they're kind of going to operate with this?
Well, I think it's like it is with some of the other Arab countries now. I think a lot of them have given pro-Palestinian information and support, but I think Egypt is going to be waiting watching and seeing what happens. And I think everyone is resigned to the fact that the Israelis will be going into the Gaza Strip, and it will be fast, and they're going to they're committed now to completely decimating Hamas and just taking them off the table as a terrorist threat now and in the future. So I think everybody's resigned to that, but I think everybody is waiting, and there's been a lot of speculation on television, news reports about, okay, what do we do beyond that? What happens next? And again, what are the Iranians' involvement and maybe other governments that may have lended some type of support to this action? So we'll have to wait and see in the days and weeks to come. I think more information will be coming out, and that will, I guess maybe force decisions to be made depending upon what that information is. But I think, in answer to your question, I think Egypt is going to be like the other countries now, just waiting to see what happens next.
What do you think Israel's reaction if confirmation comes through that Iran was directly involved in this plan?
Well, I think they're going to be talking to the United States and as well as their other partners to determine, what the course of action could be in terms of letting the Iranians know, we know you did this and you're going to pay a price for it. That could be surgical strikes. It could be strikes on their oil refineries. Could this be the final reason and justification for taking out their nuclear program? They're close to that, to getting a nuclear device. So could this be the justification? Hey, we can't, given the circumstances here and given what happened to us, we cannot ever allow the Iranians to get a nuclear weapon. Now, I know we've been trying to do that through appeasement and through deals with the Iranians over the last few years under the Biden administration in particular, to try to get them to not go down that path through understanding, appeasement, and so forth. But this changes the dynamics, and if it shows that the Iranians were behind this brutal attack, Israel can never be on board with allowing them to get a nuclear weapon under those circumstances. And obviously the appeasement route did not work. So I think there's going to be some serious discussion about attacking Iran, maybe strategically, and taking out some of their oil refineries, as Senator Graham has indicated.
The thing with that, though, is Iran obviously wouldn't just kind of roll over in that situation. It's going to create a regional conflict. Do you think the U.S. has any ground to stand on, or even an ability to stop that regional conflict if Israel decides we're going after Iran?
Well, I think that would be something that we would want to do. I mean, I think so. You have a situation where you want to punish the Iranians, but you don't want it to expand. You don't want this to be, an entire conflict involving all of the Middle East. So that just makes it a very complicated situation. So I think, again, there's going to be a lot of discussions between partners. I think, there's been a call, we need to punish the Iranians, we need to bomb them right now, we need to do all this, and there's always room for discussion, I believe. And we just need to be strategically aware of the possibility of this exploding. And then once that happens, then it becomes difficult to contain at that point. It's just, it would just be a total mess. So I think it just needs to be looked at very, very carefully. And then we need to talk with our partners, because we need to get a lot of people on board with this, and obviously the Israelis as well, because as I mentioned, they're going to get the brunt of this, and determine what the next steps are if it proves out that the Iranians were behind this.
Do you think there's a chance that we'll see a full-on conflict in the Middle East, and even, I hate to say it, but there's a risk of nuclear weapons within this scenario? There's countries all in that region relatively disabled that have access to those type of, decimating type of weapons. Well,
I certainly hope not. I certainly hope not. But is there the possibility that could happen? Sure, there is. And I certainly hope that doesn't take place. But we do have to deal, again, if the Iranians are behind this, we do have to deal with the fact that they've been a destabilizer. They export terrorism. The Ayatollahs have basically come out and applauded what just happened. So, and they've called for death to Israel. They've called for death to America. So, how do you negotiate with someone that's coming from that kind of hatred, from that kind of mindset? It becomes very, very difficult. Can you ever trust them going forward? So, obviously there's a lot of talk now about the $6 billion that we unfroze that are sitting in Qatari banks right now, and we need to refreeze it and so forth. So there are things that can be done. There are sanctions that can be placed against the Iranians that can really cause a lot of pain. And I'm talking about sanctions that are really enforced and not allowing them to sell oil to China and the Russians and get around all the things that we're sanctioning them on. So this card's on the table, but it's gonna take a concerted effort between the United States, Israel, and the partners to figure out the next steps.
If we see a full-scale Iran-Israel go to war, obviously a good amount of the countries within that region would probably side with Iran and joining in the war. It's hard to say countries like Egypt and Saudi Arabia, although they've put out support, they may not look for getting into the conflict, but you'll have some of the smaller ones as well. Does the U.S. in that type of conflict considering directly getting involved?
That's a possibility, but I would think that there would be every effort not to have that place. I mean, nobody really, other than perhaps Iran, none of the other countries are looking for destabilization in the region. So, other than Iran. So, they're going to put forth their best efforts to try and, not let that happen in whatever communications they may have with the Iranians. They're going to let their feelings be known. I would think that, hey, we're not looking for that destabilization in the entire region. So I think that's a plus to it because it serves none of their interests. The whole oil industry could be disrupted in the whole region. And so I don't think that any of these other Arab countries are in favor of that. So we have that as a plus, and I think the United States will do everything what we can to prevent this from expanding beyond the issue with Hamas right now and Hezbollah, and also finding a way to punish Iraq for their involvement in this as well.
So some of the other big geopolitical players, China and Russia, what do you think their interests are in this scenario?
Well, I think their interests are that they wouldn't be in favor of any type of conflict expanding in the Middle East as well, because, again, it's very disruptive. It's disruptive to the oil industry. China needs oil. So I don't think that they'd be in favor of it. Are they going, what's their role going to be in terms of trying to, bring a peaceful resolution to all of this? I don't know that. But I think other than Iran, no one is really interested in having this to be a full-scale conflict involving the entire region.
So the only theory that I would push back there is I have heard, so there's China, not that they're happy about what's happening in Ukraine, but it is an opportunity where the U.S. is having to put out a lot of weapons to that area, which in ourselves, our capabilities in terms of defense readiness aren't exactly as they usually would be. If we are also supplying to Israel, servicing out weapons there, it gives China the best opportunity they might have to be able to do a conflict against Taiwan, which I know they've talked about since 2025. And again, this may be creating, a really grand web of geopolitical meshing. But, I mean, do you lend credence to that? Do you see that even being a possibility?
Well, anything's a possibility, right?
Oh, yeah.
If you look at it that way, and certainly our munitions and our support to the Ukraine has caused our supply of weapons to deteriorate, and now we're going to be supplying some to Israel. But I heard reports that we basically gave them stuff that was left over that we didn't want anymore. And, so our military-industrial complex will be cranking out new and more weapons and replacing those. So, how much of an effect is it going to have on the United States in terms of our ability to do anything if the Chinese decide to do something in Taiwan? That's hard to say. I don't know. I know that, again, the Pentagon does nothing but planning. That's what they do, and there's contingent plans for just about everything. So, can we be involved in basically a three-pronged military effort? That's pretty taxing on any country, and it certainly would be on ours as well if we're continuing to be committed to the Ukrainians with weapons and money and so forth, and now this Israeli conflict, which has all the potential for continuing on, for quite some time, and then the Chinese. That would be a difficult one, because now we're dealing with three potential conflicts that could zap our resources.
And do you think Russia sees an opportunity to almost do the reverse of what we're doing in Ukraine? I don't think this one's difficult, because I don't even know if they have enough weapons to be funding themselves currently. But, some people have discussed that this would be a unique opportunity for them to be supplying places like Iran, or there's even some discussion around how much did they help logistically with supplying places like Hamas, because it's that same type of scenario of fund the enemy, make the conflict go, so they have to continue spending.
Sure. Well, I don't know. I mean, could the Russians be doing that? Could they be supplying some of these organizations and terrorist groups with some support in some form or fashion? I wouldn't say that's not a possibility. But I think obviously they're bogged down with what's going on in Ukraine right now, and that seems to be something that has no immediate end in sight. The Russians are dug in. They've got this three-pronged defensive position that the Ukrainians are having a difficult time in penetrating. And I know they had supposedly their spring offensive was going to take care of that, but the Russians are pretty well dug in, and it's going to be difficult for the Ukrainians to get them out of their position right now. So. Russians got their hands full. I don't know, how much support that they'd be willing to lend to these organizations, but it's a possibility, sure.
Last thing would be polarization in the U.S. Again, I was talking with one of my friends who's pretty involved in terms of what's going on, and one of the things we see with a lot of these historic type of events is, for the first maybe few weeks, people are kind of on the same side. And then it starts becoming very politicized. COVID's one of the best examples. For the first 2 weeks, everyone was kind of like, all right, we need to coordinate. We need to be able to flatten the curve, and all the sayings that were there. And then it quickly became extremely politicized. And even Ukraine now has become extremely politicized. But this is a bit of a different event. What do you think 6 months from now? We're going into 2024. There's going to be, obviously, politics will just continue to ramp up. What effect do you think this will have on political polarization?
Well, if you look at our history of being involved in foreign wars after World War II, we got Korea. We're still there. And then we had Vietnam, which, just really changed the landscape, and where Americans, basically just rose up and said, we've had enough. This has gone on too long, and all the reasons that you gave us to be concerned about are not here. So it was the political pressure from within that caused us to get out of Vietnam. And when you look back at it, we have good relations with Vietnam right now. We trade with them, and and they're a communist country. And you say to yourself, what was all of that? We lost 58,000 of our own troops, hundreds of thousands wounded, 3 million Vietnamese were killed. And you say to yourself, wow, what was all of that for? All wars have a beginning and all wars have an end. And I always say, why can't we just get to the end and skip this horrific stuff in the middle? So you have that. And then you have our involvement in Iraq, which went on for around 11 years. And that was a war that I feel didn't need to happen. And I think most people now would agree with that assessment, given our hindsight and what had happened, and the fact that they had nothing to do with 9/11. They didn't have any WMDs. Yes, Saddam Hussein was a bad guy, and I didn't shed a tear when he met the hangman, but a lot of people died for that. And then we have Afghanistan, in which I felt that we were justified in going in there because that's where 9/11 was hatched. We had to get the Taliban out of there. We had to decimate them. But we stayed for 20 years. And when we went into Afghanistan, there was a government in Kabul. And there was corruption and so forth, but there was a government, and the Taliban were sort of on the outskirts. 20 years of fighting, they now control the entire country. So I think that Americans are very wary of getting involved in these things, given our track record and given the amount of money and blood and treasure that we exerted over the years. So it was interesting because when we left Afghanistan, I put out a blurb and a post that said, okay, we're leaving Afghanistan, but bang a left-hand turn into Ukraine. And that's exactly what happened. And here we are now thinking that this thing would have been long over. And it's still going on with really no end in sight, billions of dollars, and a commitment from President Biden. We're going to stay as long as it takes and for how much, whatever it costs. That's tough. That's tough for the Americans. Now here we are again, with this potential conflict. So yeah, it's going to be a challenge because you're going to probably get people that are going to be saying, where does this ever end for us? We're involved in this thing again. Now this has a little different connotation, particularly if it involves Americans being killed and so forth. But I wouldn't be surprised if we would have, even though this thing has been so barbaric and horrific, where we have some pushback from Americans and maybe some members of Congress about how far do we go. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think it's all up in the air right now, and but I do think Americans are war weary. We've been fighting for 20 years in Afghanistan, 11 years in Iraq, and here we are in Ukraine, and now potentially in the Middle East. That's tough.
No, that definitely answers the question, because I think we talked about some of these more out there theories that are coming out about the war, but there is a level of credence there because we have had issues in the past, like Gulf of Tonkin's, like a very well-known issue. Obviously, Grey Bird to Baghdad, one of the main talking points is the fact of WMDs. The baby thing, people are relating to with Fallujah, talking about how they were thrown out of incubators, and that ended up, testimony wasn't necessarily true. So the American people have been lied to, and so there's a justification for being hesitant about jumping into the next conflict. I guess the main question with that would be, how do you turn this, instead of it being the WMDs, the Gulf of Tonkin, like these issues where there's hesitancy there, how do you turn it into what was 9/12? I've heard 9/12 so many times from so many people have said that day was where Americans really came together, and we haven't had something like that in forever. And I think we've needed it many times in the past few years, but I think now more than ever might be an opportunity to put that together. So how do you generate that type of feeling back in the American people?
Well, this is a little bit different because obviously 9/11 was a direct attack on the United States, and it was overwhelming. I mean, it was an attempt to decapitate our government. I mean, that without a doubt, that's what their goal was. I mean, they hit, the towers in New York City. They hit the Pentagon, and we think one of the aircraft was coming in, for the Capitol or the White House. So it was a large effort to do that. So I think that brought everybody together because it was a direct attack on us. As horrific and as barbaric as what's happening in Israel, it's not the same, I think, in the minds of Americans because it's there. It's not here. And so to rally that type of support, and you've already seen, the breakdown of that right now, where you have pro-Palestinian protests just popping up all over the country and all over the world. So I think it's going to be different this time to rally that sense of being connected because of 9/11, even though this thing has been horrific. And, we may lose some Americans in this, but we lost Americans in Afghanistan. And, as we left, and did that bring us together? Did that, did we coalesce around that issue and say, hey, we're going to come together now? And no, we didn't. So I don't know. I don't know what it would take. I certainly hope that we never have any event that would cause us to have to, come together for that reason. So yeah, it's going to be a challenge because we've already seen where some Americans stand on the issue, and I was just surprised to hear all these student groups coming out of Harvard, with these pro-Palestinian, and again, I as I mentioned earlier in the show, I don't want to indicate that I don't think the Palestinians have any beef here. but I just think that what took place just just overwhelms that, and it's gone beyond the pale with what took place and the horror and the barbarity of this particular attack. So I just can't see people supporting this because of that reason. So I don't know. It's I don't know where we're going to wind up on this. I just hope we wind up on the good side, and I just hope that there's one day. I said to my wife the other day, man has been walking the earth for millions of years, and it's 2023, but we still can't figure out how not to kill each other. And it's a sad state of affairs. And I've often said that warfare is man's greatest failure.
Well, Stephen, I don't think there's a better way to end that. I mean, this has been one of the worst things we've seen in quite a long time. And as we've highlighted, there's a lot of ways that it can continue to get worse and likely will. But, with what you just said there, I think that's something that a lot of people have to have in their head here is there's an openness for discussion, but the discussion should be, how do we get to the right conclusion? How do we find peace and not just continue to kind of create a lot of the chaos that we've seen in these regions for decades? So
sure, we can only hope, right?
Well, thank you for coming on today.
Thank you.
Just letting everybody know, Stephen is launching a channel, so if you want to know more about this topic, it's going to be linked below. He's releasing his first video. Awesome video. Really covers in depth some of the stuff we talked about today, but also provides a little bit more perspective in some of the intelligence areas and stuff. And he's going to be releasing a lot more on conflicts all happening around the world and intelligence things happening all around the world and much more. So really excited to see it, Stephen, and I know they're going to be excited as well.
Awesome.
When I was young